This is part of our Quality Online Course Series, Accessibility, Usability, and Student Support. My name is Tracy Miller, and this particular workshop aligns with Quality Matters Standards 7 and 8. So if you're familiar with Quality Matters, that of course will make more sense to you, but that's okay. We're not going to focus too much on the Quality Matters standards. We're going to focus more on those best practices in online course design that will really help and support your students. So, again, my name is Tracy Miller. I'm the online teaching coordinator. Here is some ways that you can contact and connect with me. So if you do have any sort of offline questions that you want to discuss or some ideas you want to discuss with me, just reach out and I'll be happy to have a conversation in more detail with any of you. So I'm moving quickly. It does cover 2 of the Quality Matters standards. There's sort of a lot packed into this presentation this afternoon, but it is also one that's pretty practical. There's not a lot of theory. There's not a lot of maybe more effective type of learning. There's some really practical tips that I'm going to give you in this workshop. But let's begin by talking about some factors that can influence the success of our online students. And so you can read through the bullet points yourself. I might pick a couple out, but there are things that really influence all of our student success, but maybe they're a little bit more obvious when you're in an online environment. One of them I'm going to pick out is actually isolation. So the fact that a student may never be coming to campus, may be, kind of interacting with this online course, sitting in the comfort of their own home, that's great, but they can also feel that sense of isolation. So we want to make sure we alleviate some of those barriers and those other things that get in the way of the student's success in an online course. So these are factors that really tie into this idea of accessibility and usability. So just kind of keep all of these factors in mind. This is sort of our target, that we're going to try to only make these influences stronger and better so that the students do feel that sense of support from you and from the institution. So my objectives for this afternoon, our next, let's see, 53 minutes together, is we're going to explore how usability and accessibility can set your students up for success. And we're also going to talk about how you can provide ways that your students can connect with other valuable support services, and especially helping your students learn how to connect with these valuable services is, again, one of those just really practical things, but so meaningful for your students' experience in an online course. So let's start with the first one. Let's start with usability. I think it's something that we may be very nervous about. As a student, certainly, if they're new to an online environment, are going to want to know how they can participate and use the tools. How are they going to navigate through the course? All of these things are going through their head that are sort of above and beyond the actual content. So that's why some of these strategies and these design principles really help your course to be usable by your students. So let's talk a little bit about what that might look like. And just as a slight pause, I want to make sure that I am caught up on my attendance so I get everybody in there correctly. Looks like I am. So as far as usability goes, you really want to plan out your navigation of your course, and that's that design phase, that development phase as you're putting a course together. how do you want the navigation to work for your students? Something that's going to be predictable, consistent throughout the student's experience, label things in ways that make sense. So here's how we're going to kind of go over some of that. So I begin by saying, okay, plan out your navigation. Here's how it's sort of a sample course that was put together. Here's how you could do it that would plan out the navigation a little bit. You could start with an area that would be a welcome start here. Be very clear for the students that that is where they should begin. Give them some pointers on what the navigation is going to look like. And then you can see there's different ways you can label this navigation. In the planning, you might be planning out what you're going to call them, what makes the most sense to add into the different categories. In some ways, you know, here at NIU, we also have a default menu that you can use. Sometimes it's just getting rid of things that you know you're not going to use and kind of eliminating them from the menu. So as you're planning out these things, things may shift and change, but at least you're thinking about it up front. And then when your students are in the course, you're letting them know how they use this environment and how the navigation has been designed. So I see we just had Amanda join us, and so I'm going to make sure I mark her as attended. So my second piece of advice on usability is to chunk and organize your content up. And I always say that there's two favorable ways I think of using chunk. One is for designing courses and making your content, kind of breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, but then bite-sized pieces also make me think of really big chocolate chips. So that's another great way to use the word chunk. And I'm probably, there's lots of crickets going on in the background because my comedic talents are very minor. So how do we chunk up and organize our content? Well, you can chunk it up using folders. And this is a Blackboard folder icon here. You don't have to call them modules like we're calling them here. You can call them weekly folders. You can call them units. You can break things down into topics. But the idea is that you do break them down, chunk them up into those bite-sized pieces so that the students see that everything is sort of organized into sort of these packets. One of the things you can also do with these folders is you can adaptive release them. So the folders are all designed and developed in your course, but they will be hidden from your students until the week or the week before the course, just so the students are seeing maybe the most relevant information. At the top, you can see, in this case, I have them Module 9 is down below, Module 10 is up above. During Module 11, that would open up and be at the top. So that's another recommendation, is to reverse your things to make it easier for your students. I was talking with a group last week, and they were talking, we were looking at an online course, a sample online course, and you know, there was so much information in there. So one of the ways to kind of package up and reduce the students seeing so much information at first is to kind of hide these folders and then have them become available to the student when it's relevant to them. So that was a lot on usability and navigation in really just a couple slides. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have on those. I will pause for just a minute, but if there isn't any questions, we can move on to accessibility. These topics also interrelate with each other. So I think you will find that some of that usability will definitely come out in our topic on accessibility. So raise of hands or even a yes in the text chat area. How many of you were really interested in this session because of the topic of accessibility? I thought that might be the case. Okay. Thank you everyone for responding, by the way. So, so one of the reasons I kind of get through usability maybe a little more quickly so that we can start talking about accessibility. So I'm going to begin by giving you some of the definitions that really speak to me on what accessibility means. So these are some that I kind of pulled out. So first of all, accessibility refers to the quality of being available when needed. So that has a lot to do with us being accessible to our students, right? So um, we want to be available to them, but we also want our materials to be available to them and available to them when it's needed. Another definition these all work together is that anything that we develop and design into our course is easy to use, is approachable by a diverse body of students, and that students are really able to equally participate in your online course. Finally, this last one, attainable, obtainable, and attainable. So what do I mean about that? Well, obtainable means it ties back a little bit more to that ease of use. So can the students have access to our materials, and how obtainable, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10 are they? But also, is your course attainable? And that has to do with, can the students reach their goals that you have for them? Can they attain a high level of achievement? So when we design our course to be accessible, we really want to think about these definitions and kind of the different nuances around them. But we most likely think about accessibility when we're thinking about our students with disabilities. So students that maybe require accommodation, maybe have a disability, whether it's visible or a hidden disability. And so here at Northern, we have a disability policy that is a requirement to go on all the syllabi. We also have an excellent disability resource center. So one of the ways we want to support our students is to, first of all, let them know about the ADA statement that we have, let them know that it's there, but also that we support the disability statement. And then I've also added some links in here. So you might have this information in your syllabus, but I really recommend that you put a little bit more front and center so that the students are reminded that those resources are available to them, and they can tap into them if they need to. So I add into my courses, again, a link to the Disability Resource Center. I've also added some other links that just help the students understand where these policies are coming from and other supports and standards that are out there for them. And again, that could look like it did on the last slide in your page, but I want to make sure you have all this information for you. I've curated a lot of these resources for you, and I'm going to actually put several links into the text chat area so that you can bookmark them right now and have them ready to put into your course. So the first one I'm going to add is again, that Disability Resource Center link. For those of you like our friend John from Wabanzi, sure Wabanzi has a similar type of resource. The important part is that you just add it in there for your online students. You can also connect them with other ways of communicating, connecting with your resource centers. So again, this is just some information that we have here at NIU. So I did talk about, we often start by thinking about our students that maybe have an accommodation, or we're really thinking about how we can support our students with disabilities. But the whole idea of accessibility is to be able to support a real diverse population of students. And anytime you use universal design principles in designing your course is really going to help you meet those accessibility guidelines, but it's also going to benefit really the majority of your students. So when I talk about universal design, and I'm only going to talk about it briefly. I'm reminded of a workshop series that we did here in faculty development in the past. So I'm going to add that link in there. So if there's anything more you would like to learn about universal design, definitely check out that recording of some of our earlier workshops on universal design. So here again, some practical tips on ways that you can make your course be more universally design friendly, more accessible for, again, that diverse body of students in your course. So one thing is to provide any printed materials in an alternative format. So creating a Word document and making it into an accessible PDF, for instance, will be more likely that your printed materials will be screen readable. So that's an important thing for students that have low or no vision. Make sure any font styles and sizes are really legible. And that is really for all of our students, even those that don't necessarily have low vision, but it takes away some of the clutter from a document. And there's so many choices we have now between how we design our PowerPoint slides to which buttons we pick in our left-hand navigation. So we really want to make sure that any kind of fonts, again, are really legible and clear. Also think about your use of negative space. So that's sort of all that space around where your texts and pictures are. And it really helps, again, reduce that clutter, and it also gives an emphasis or a focus on the important parts of any kind of instructional material that you're putting together for your students. If you're using audio, make sure that your audio is clear, that you take some time to maybe script it out so that you know the points you're going to make and things become more clear that way. If you are using long videos, we're going to use that word again, chunk them up, break them down into bite-sized pieces. That will help students stay focused. It will keep them from sort of diverting into other topics. And the research has really shown that, the shorter the video, the more attention that the students are going to have. So I have a question here. Does the Universal Design Workshop cover about how to create various instructional materials to meet learning demands from students with diverse disabilities? Yes, hearing and visual impairments. Gives you a lot of ideas on how to do that, yes. And that's a little bit of what we're covering right now. So for instance, we talked a little bit about students with visual disabilities, and we're also going to talk a little bit about students with low or no hearing type of disabilities. And actually, that's one of the ways we're going to kind of move on. That was a really good segue. Thank you. So here's some alternatives, some other ways you can do it, maybe besides creating a PDF of a document. In Blackboard, you can actually use quick links, and quick links are for keyboard-only students. So those are students that have low or no vision and they only use their keyboard. So they know how to sort of navigate through a web page or a learning management system like Blackboard if the links are set up correctly. So this is actually sort of happening in the background of your Blackboard course that you may not even be aware of. But if you're in Blackboard and you click on Shift-Alt-L, you will see a quick link navigation, and that's what I've shown here on this page here. And basically, it becomes almost an outline, and then that keyboard-only student can know how to click through the menu. And, you know, it will be read out loud to them. I'm trying to decide how to describe that a little bit, but it's actually really kind of cool. Using the quick links or just looking at those quick links too, I think give you a pretty good idea about how you do have things structured and how the navigation does work. So again, it's just a really good thing to do, is kind of to look through how that navigation is working using the quick links. Although the quick links are actually for students with visual disability. A couple other things you can do. Anytime you add a graph or a picture, an image, you want to use that alt tag. You've probably seen it come up and maybe you've just clicked by it because you're trying to add a lot of pictures. But it's important for your students to understand that what that image was if they are not able to actually see it. So alt tags, remembering that your quick links are available to your students are some great things. I want to make sure I get all of my notes on that. So we did talk a little bit about students with maybe a hearing disability as far as having that audio be really clear, and that may be for more of a student with English as a second language. Also beneficial for those students, but it's very important for students with no hearing to be able to benefit from closed captioning and transcripts. So this second screen shot I have over here is actually an example of a MOOC that we did several years ago called Perspectives on Disability, and everything was closed caption. So students with low or no hearing can actually read through the closed captioning. You can take those closed captions and you can also create a transcript so that students are able to read through the transcript. Again, great benefit to all students. Students can really benefit, especially in in a noisy environment like on a train. They're catching up on their work on a train and they can actually read the closed captioning, or they're listening to it and they're reading it, and that's just helping them. That multiple modality helps the students with the content. So closed captioning and transcripts, great kind of things to do, and they're actually required to do. The law used to say that students needed just the transcripts of anything that you had on video, but they are now saying that closed captioning also needs to be provided, and that's so that the students are matching up a visual, let's say you're explaining a graph or a chart, with the script or the words that you're actually saying on the screen. So as far as creating some of these alternatives, again, I would recommend that you check out the Universal Design Series or talk to some of us on how you can do that. But you can use YouTube and use their auto closed captioning. One of the things I will recommend is, although it's fairly good, auto captioning at this point, it's not perfect. And it certainly doesn't do anything like punctuation or maybe technical terms that might be more specific to your discipline. But if you start with the auto caption from YouTube, it's fairly easy to actually make some just quick changes and be able to close caption your videos for your students, again, to make them the most accessible to your students. But also you're getting ahead of this. So if you do have a student, let's say 2 semesters from now, that has an accommodation, all of your content and instructional materials have already been made accessible and the work has already been done. So again, it seems like some work up front, definitely valuable work up front, but it's going to save you time in the long run and again, really be important for your student success. Another pretty easy tip, if you are using any external technology, add links in your course for what those accessibility policies are for that kind of external tool. And that's also going to have you check it out to let you know that maybe the tools that you are picking may or may not be as accessible as you were hoping. But again, the students can kind of look that up if they'd like to too. So I use this example of VoiceThread. It is an external tool. It's actually sort of a way to annotate over a PowerPoint presentation and share it with the class. So if your students were doing a PowerPoint presentation and they did it in VoiceThread, other students could comment on them, give them some input. They can actually do it through text, call through their telephone, or use a microphone. So again, it gives them a lot of choice, which is always important in accessibility. But I also like the policy that VoiceThread uses. So they talk about, I think, maybe some of these more hidden disabilities, but they also refer to their learners as differently labeled. And so I think VoiceThread has a really good handle on really creating the most accessible tool possible. So we just talked a little bit about accessibility. Anyone else add to the text box anything else that you'd like to share, maybe some best practices that you like to do when you're thinking about accessibility for your students. And if anyone is typing in, please feel free to do so. One just popped into my head that I should actually add to this slide deck. If you are using Blackboard Collaborate Ultra, like we are right now, you can actually use a captionist in that environment. So if you do have a student that has an accommodation that requires a captionist in your sort of live online courses, and you're going to use Collaborate, you can contact the DRC and arrange for a captionist to be part of your live sessions like this. And it's actually fairly easy to do. It's just promoting them, person that joins this session, a captionist, to the role of captionist, and that live closed caption just is right there for your students. Amanda said, I check in with students at the beginning of the semester and ask them what file types, etc., work best for them. That's a really good idea. I love that idea. It doesn't even seem like maybe too much work. Sometimes there's a little caution with that because, um, what if they suddenly tell you they want everything in Flash or something, and you're not able to do that. But certainly if you gave students a couple different options and let them know what options you preferred to, that's a really great idea. Thanks for sharing. So we're switching gears again, and we're going to talk about academic support and student services and how it may be a little bit different, maybe a lot different in your online course. So first of all, I'd like to call out the great work of some of our tutoring folks around campus. They have created these 5-minute tutorials. Different departments have more and more online tutoring options for students. And so if that's something that you do have available, to your students in your department, or you come across one that really makes sense to your department or your discipline, let your students know that there is tutoring available for them. And sometimes it takes a little bit of searching around, but when you find them, um, again, that's going to be something that you might have referred them to if they were in your face-to-face course, because you may be more familiar with those tutoring opportunities, but make sure you try to connect your students with those if you do. Maybe you have a GTA that would be willing to do some online tutoring sessions. Let your students know, connect your students with these tutoring opportunities. Our library here at NIU, and let me find that. Here's where I start adding a bunch of those URLs. Let me put that tutoring one in there first. So if you like the one I already shared, it's available to you. The library has a bunch of online types of opportunities to connect with students. So there's this Ask a Librarian, and even librarians that are subject specialists can help their students either, again, you can see with maybe doing how to cite, finding new references, ordering journals and book chapters from our databases. All of these things are available to our students. Even though we think about the library being a very physical location, here in DeKalb, the Founders Library is a huge sort of staple of our community, but it's also great for those online students. The library also, as kind of a side, has really been moving towards an open educational resource movement too, so they're looking for more and more electronic, free for students to use textbooks and other resources. So keep your eyes open for anything you hear from the library that OER textbooks, open textbooks for your students, because part of the idea of accessible is that it's also accessible for students that might have financial situations. So how is this accessible to them in terms of finance? Those textbooks, they're so expensive. I have one college graduate and one junior in college, and oh my gosh, the bills they get for those textbooks. So our library is really moving more and more towards those open textbooks. Check it out when you get a chance. Student support. So this is another thing that came up last week. So there's a lot that we're providing for our online students that maybe we don't do as much of in our face-to-face course, because really face-to-face students, at least those incoming freshmen and those incoming transfer students, they get an orientation and they are walked through a lot of these things. And then when they come into our course, they've already been introduced to them. We're not to the point where that's quite happening for our online students. So again, it's fairly easy to do. We can kind of point them in the right direction. So there's more and more of these student support units here on campus that actually have online components to it. So one of them is the Writing Center. And so the Writing Center has a Google Hangout where they will actually do an online tutoring session with students, which I think is really cool. It's actually kind of tied to the first year composition program. So if your students are maybe struggling with writing and maybe your course is more writing intensive, you can actually set them up with the Writing Center and they can get some more support that way. Let's see. I want to make sure I give you all of the different support units. Some of these might be a little bit more outside of that academic support, but there's also some different just student support, counseling and other things that you can provide your students with links to so that they can benefit from those services we already have on campus. So check those out. Talking a little bit more about the academic ones. Here are, again, some other functions. We have the A+ program, peer-assisted learning, supplemental instructions. All of those are beginning to have more and more access online. There's at least a phone number and a website for your students to be able to tap into some of those resources. The Career Resource Center has some online tools that will help them build their resumes. They can search for internships online. Now, maybe that's a little different if the internship seems to be very DeKalb-ish. They may have to expand that out a little bit further, but that is something that, again, is building more and more every time I look at these different support units. There's a Husky to Husky online mentoring program. So that's mentoring between an alumni and a current student. And again, it's done online. So those students are able to still connect with our community as a whole, which is a lot of getting back to that first thing we talked about, which is isolation. It's really important for the students to feel like they are still connected with our broader community. That sense of belonging really helps their achievement, but also retains the students because they do feel like there's a connection to that university. So again, check out a lot of these resources. Add them into your course. So this is all about quality online course design. Part of your design should be adding those student resource areas. If we go back to our left-hand navigation, that idea that the students would be able to understand the course right from the start, maybe there's a section that says student support or how to get help. Again, it's up to you how you want to describe them to your students. The idea is that you just provide them with that information. Amanda said, can any student use online Husky to Husky mentoring? Yes, they can. A very good question. It actually started for the face-to-face students, but the face-to-face students may be on campus, but our alumni all over the world, you know, they're going to connect to them Again, maybe through something like Skype for Business or Google Hangouts, or whatever their kind of favorite way to connect with each other online is. But great question, absolutely is there for all of our students. It's just they happen to do it online. Okay, so your technical requirements. Here's how you can really support your students with the technical requirements. And one is to let your students know what hardware and software is required right at the beginning of the course. Maybe it's even part of the description of the course if it's something you think is going to take some time to get. So it's almost like telling them what textbook they need. They're going to be a little hesitant about making some purchases until they understand what they need to get and why they need to get it. So if the hardware and the software is important to the course, let them know, but I'll let them know how to obtain it. So if that is something that they need to download, is it something that they need to go to Best Buy to go purchase, let them know how they can do that. And again, maybe a little bit about that purpose of why they need to do that. Hopefully then when you are ready to go and use that hardware and software, the students have it, they're also ready to go. So a couple ways to make it more obtainable. If one of these software tools you're using is available in Anywhere apps, which is something we have here at NIU. Let the students know that's where they can download it. It's going to be something that's free for them to download, so that's going to be definitely more accessible for your students. Let them know what it is, where they can get it. If there's something that you would like added to the Anywhere apps, I'm not saying that DoIT's going to tell you that you can absolutely have it, but at least have that conversation with your department, have that conversation with DoIT and see if you can get your course-specific software added to these Anywhere apps. If it is a software that might be more expensive, more difficult to use for your students, you're going to want to kind of question yourself as to how much that supports your students and do you really need to use that hardware or software. Some cases the answer is going to absolutely be yes. The students need that to reach the course objectives, and so that's fine. Again, you just want to clearly specify what they are and how students can get at it and plan for that experience. Make sure when you think about any technology requirements, think about how it's being supported and let your students know. Is there a browser where it works a little bit better? For instance, Collaborate Ultra works better on Google Chrome and Firefox. And we don't always recommend, we rarely recommend Internet Explorer. And, you know, in some cases you want to look at whether it's going to work on a PC and a Mac. All of these things are important for you when picking out technology, but also it really supports your students when you let them know that. So I think about the Google Chromebooks. Google Chromebooks are great, affordable technology resources, but you can't actually, you know, add any software to them. They're meant to work off of all the Google products. And so if there's something, a software that's, again, really important to your course, and your students are going to need it, you're going to want to make sure that they know that if they have a Google Chromebook, they will have to find alternative computer, whether it's going to their public library, borrowing a friend's computer for that particular purpose. Just, again, letting them know what they need, how they can get it, and what they're going to need it for. Here at NIU, remember to let your students know that the service desk is available for them. That will not only provide them with more support, and actually I have to change this slide. ITS has reduced some of their hours of support. They analyzed when their peak hours were, and due to, of course, budget constraints, had to reduce some of their hours down. So you might want to check that out. But I'm pretty sure it's more like 24/7, but maybe only, maybe not 24. I think they're open until like maybe 10 p.m. or something like that at this point. Let them know the service desk is available through phone or email. I usually tell my students that if they have a technical problem, to immediately alert the service desk and also to CC me. And that's so they are able to help them, but I also have sort of that evidence that they were having difficulty, and that might help when we kind of troubleshoot through it later. So there's also a knowledge base, kb.neu.edu, that has a lot of job aids, just-in-time tutorials for students if they're having any technical issues. So refer them to that knowledge base if they have those types of questions, or if you're predicting maybe there's something that they might stumble over at first, you can give them some links to the knowledge base. Also, the Teaching with Blackboard site that we have for all of you, we've developed a few pages for students. Our focus is on faculty, instructors, and teaching staff, graduate teaching assistants. So we don't have as much focus on the students, but we have pulled together a few resources for the students. Sorry, I had a huge cough and I tried to save you from it. That's what always happens in the last 10 minutes of my workshop. I just start losing my voice. So my final suggestion for technology support is to really take advantage of lynda.com. We have an institutional license of lynda.com here at NIU. And so if there's something that you would like your students to learn more about, but it's more foundational, secondary to your content, take advantage of lynda.com and the tutorials that they have available there. So for instance, if you require your students to use Excel, there is, of course, many tutorials on how to use Excel. So you're sticking to maybe your accountancy or your statistics or whatever else that you're using Excel for, and you may find that your students could really use a refresher on using Excel. Add a link to a lynda.com video and let lynda.com kind of provide that technical support for you. Okay, so we are at the end of our session. I want to make sure that you ask any questions or have any comments that you may have, but I do want to tie this back to how this does fit into Quality Matters, standards for online course design. So this is especially since it was two standards, this is a really big sentence. I don't normally read off my slides, but I think there's some value in reading this slide. So quality online courses have clear descriptions on how technical support is offered, along with access to accessibility policies and services, academic, student support to help learners succeed, and to meet the needs of all learners. The course navigation is easy to use. Information on all the accessible technologies is provided. Students are provided with alternative access to course materials. Design facilitates readability, and multimedia is an enhancement and not a barrier. So again, a lot. but I think it gives you some ideas on how you can incorporate some of these things into your online course. I will be sending you a follow-up again with the recording links, so you can go back and review this recording if you'd like to. It will also include a couple quick guides. So if you would like to use those quick guides to remind you of the different processes in there, those quick guides can kind of just pull them out when you're designing the course, add those links I've already talked about in there, and it's going to really bring your course up to the next level as it relates to usability, accessibility, and student support. Finally, that link email that I'll send out will include our survey. I just added the survey into the text chat area. I always appreciate feedback from everyone to kind of change up any of my workshops. Maybe you have a new idea, a new strategy that you'd love to incorporate. But I'm always really open to your feedback. So if you take just a couple minutes to fill out that feedback, I'd sure appreciate it. So here's what we've talked about in the last 50 minutes or so. Your course design should reflect a commitment to accessibility and usability for all students. Also, that support is important to student success and should be made accessible to all students, including our online students, and to take advantage of any tools or services available to you and to your students. They are out there and they're becoming more and more useful and accessible. So again, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Tracy Miller. Here is my contact information once again, and I'm happy to stick around for a few to answer any specific questions you have. For now,